The story begins in the heart of the Yukon, where the icy winds carry both dreams and despair. For years, Tony Beets had ruled this land with his iron will and fierce determination. Known as the Viking of gold mining, Tony had built an empire from nothing. Every rock, every shovel, and every ounce of gold was a symbol of his hard work. But even the strongest empire can fall, and Tony was about to learn that power comes with a price. It started like any other mining season. The Beets family was ready, the dredges were fueled, and the team was eager to hit the ground running. Tony, standing on the edge of his claim, looked across the frozen landscape. His eyes burned with the same fire that carried him through decades of hardship. But deep down, he could sense something wasn't right. The government had been tightening regulations, the inspectors were visiting more often, and whispers spread through the mining camps that Tony Beets had gone too far this time. Tony had always done things his own way. He didn't like rules. He didn't like people telling him what to do on his land. That attitude had made him famous, but it also made him enemies. For years, officials had turned a blind eye because Tony's operations brought jobs and boosted the local economy. But now, a new set of environmental laws had come into play, and Tony's methods were suddenly under a microscope. When the first warning letter arrived, Tony didn't care. He tossed it aside, calling it bureaucratic nonsense. But the second letter was more serious. It warned of violations of water management protocols and demanded immediate compliance. Still, Tony refused to back down. "I've been mining before these people were even born," he said angrily. "I'm not shutting down because of some paper pushers." Weeks later, the inspectors arrived without warning. They examined the dredge sites, the pumps, and the tailings. Cameras captured the tense atmosphere as Tony's crew stood by, uncertain what was happening. Then, the moment came that changed everything. The lead inspector handed Tony a document, a cease and desist order. The words hit like a hammer. Tony Beets was officially banned from mining until further notice. At first, Tony thought it was a joke. "You can't just stop me," he shouted, but it was real. His claim was temporarily shut down, and his entire operation was frozen. Trucks stopped moving, excavators sat idle, and dozens of workers stood in disbelief. Tony's heart sank as he watched years of effort collapse overnight. For the first time in his career, the Viking had been defeated, not by nature, but by law. The mining community erupted with gossip. Some said Tony had ignored too many warnings. Others believed it was a personal attack. Social media lit up with speculation, and rival miners whispered that maybe Tony's time had finally come. But while Tony battled the government, another man saw an opportunity. Parker Schnabel. Parker had always respected Tony, even when they were rivals. But deep down, he was also a competitor. He had learned from Tony, worked with him, and even clashed with him in the past. Now, seeing Tony banned from mining, Parker knew this was his moment to rise higher than ever before. When Parker heard the news, he didn't waste a second. His team was already in full swing, but he wanted to expand. There were open claims available, some of them bordering Tony's land. He called his crew together and said, "We're not slowing down. This is our time." He moved fast, applying for new permits, negotiating with landowners, and mobilizing his equipment toward the areas Tony could no longer touch. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been clearer. Tony sat in his office, furious, trying to appeal the ban, while Parker was out in the field, smiling, pushing his crew harder than ever before. The young miner who once looked up to Tony was now leading one of the largest gold mining operations in the Yukon. Meanwhile, Tony's daughter Monica tried to hold things together. She visited her father and tried to calm him down. "We'll fix this, Dad," she said softly. But Tony wasn't used to waiting. He felt powerless, and that feeling burned worse than failure. "They can't stop me forever," he growled. "They want war, they'll get one." The Beets family began fighting back legally, hiring lawyers and environmental consultants to challenge the ban. But the process was slow, and the season was slipping away. Every day that passed without mining meant lost profit, wasted manpower, and the painful sight of idle machines rusting under the cold Yukon sun. While Tony struggled, Parker's season exploded with success. His new equipment worked flawlessly, his team was motivated, and his gold count was climbing higher than ever. Reporters started calling him the new king of the Klondike. Parker, though respectful in interviews, couldn't hide his pride. He said, "We've worked hard for this. Sometimes opportunities come when you least expect them." Behind those words, everyone knew what he meant. He had taken advantage of Tony's downfall. And in mining, that's exactly what you do if you want to survive. Back on Tony's claim, silence ruled the camp. The dredge that once roared day and night now stood still. Birds nested in the metal arms and puddles formed around unused tires. It was eerie, a ghost town of machines. Tony walked through the site, running his hand over the cold steel. Each piece of equipment told a story of his life. The battles, the triumphs, the years of sweat and grit. Now it all felt meaningless. He sat down on a rock, staring at the horizon. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Had he pushed too hard? Had his pride blinded him to the warnings? But before that thought could settle, anger took over again. "No," he muttered, "they're wrong. I built this land. I made this happen. Nobody takes that from me." In town, rumors continued to spread. Some said Tony was planning to leave the Yukon altogether. Others claimed he was preparing to mine in secret. But what none of them knew was that Tony Beets was already planning his next move. Something bold, something only he would dare attempt. He called his crew together in the middle of the night. The air was cold, the sky filled with stars. "Listen up," he said. "They think they've stopped us, but we don't stop. We adapt." His plan was simple: to move part of his operation to a neighboring private land that wasn't covered by the ban. It would be risky, it would cost money, but it would keep the Beets name alive. His loyal workers, inspired by his determination, agreed to follow him. "If the Viking's sailing, we're sailing with him," one of them said proudly. As Tony prepared to move his machines, Parker's crew worked nonstop, pulling record amounts of gold from the ground. Parker's smile grew wider each week as he watched the scales tip in his favor. "This is what happens when you stay focused," he told his team. "We don't waste time blaming anyone, we just dig." For Tony, every ounce of gold Parker found felt like a personal insult, a reminder of what he was missing. But deep down, even Parker knew that without Tony Beets, he might never have become the miner he was. There was respect, but also rivalry, the kind that fuels legends. Weeks passed. The Yukon thawed, rivers flowed again, and the mining season reached its peak. Tony's legal team finally received a notice. The government had agreed to review his case. It wasn't victory, but it was hope. Tony smiled for the first time in months. "They'll regret ever crossing me," he said. Meanwhile, Parker reached his biggest gold total yet. His team celebrated, cheering and shouting as gold poured into the pans. But as he looked around, Parker couldn't help thinking of Tony. "He's not done," he said quietly. "He'll be back." And deep in the Yukon night, as the campfires flickered and the mountains slept, Tony Beets stood by his idle dredge, the wind whipping through his hair. His eyes gleamed with determination. "They banned me, but they can't stop me. I'll be back, and I'll take back what's mine."
And night. Every week, the gold count rose higher. Investors smiled, sponsors called, and Parker became the face of modern Yukon mining. On camera, he looked calm and proud, but off camera, he was restless. The more gold he found, the more pressure he felt. Managing bigger crews, keeping up with maintenance, and chasing higher goals started to wear him down. He often looked out over the hills toward where Tony's land used to roar with engines. "It's strange without him," Parker said quietly one night. "It's too quiet out there." But Tony wasn't gone. Not yet. Weeks later, his crew hit a strange patch of soil. The color looked different, darker, richer. When the first bucket came up from the wash plant, they all leaned in. Gold shimmered faintly under the gravel. "We've got color," one of them shouted. Tony grinned. "I told you, the Viking never quits." The morale shifted instantly. The men worked harder, faster, and stronger. The small operation began to pick up momentum. The gold count rose slowly but steadily. It wasn't massive like Parker's totals, but it was proof that Tony was still in the game. Back in town, word spread fast. "Tony Beets is mining again," people whispered. Some laughed, others cheered. But Parker knew what it meant. The old legend was returning. He didn't say it out loud, but deep down, he respected it. "He's a fighter," Parker told his foreman. "You can't keep a man like that down forever." Still, Parker had problems of his own. Expansion came with new challenges. More machinery meant more breakdowns. More people meant more mistakes. One major flood hit one of his sites, washing away hours of progress. The pressure of staying number one started to crack his patience. One night, sitting by the campfire, Parker stared into the flames and muttered, "Tony made this look easy. It's not." Meanwhile, Tony's crew struck a richer vein. Every load from the wash plant brought more gold. His grin grew wider with each cleanup. "See," he said proudly, "they thought I was finished. They were wrong." The gold was coarse and pure, signs that they were close to a strong deposit. His daughter Monica, who had stood by him through everything, smiled and said, "Told you we'd bounce back." But the Yukon is never kind for long. Just as Tony's comeback began to shine, another problem appeared. The environmental office sent another notice, this time accusing him of unauthorized movement of machinery and improper waste management. Tony slammed the paper down in anger. "They're watching me like a hawk." His lawyer advised him to stay calm, but Tony's patience was gone. He felt targeted, as if someone wanted him out of the game for good. "Let them come," he said. "I've been through worse." But he knew the inspectors could shut him down again if he slipped even once. As the season neared its midpoint, a strange tension grew between Parker and Tony. They never spoke directly, but they both knew the other was watching. Parker's camera sometimes caught him glancing toward the distant hills, where faint dust clouds marked Tony's new dig site. "He's out there. He's always out there." One evening, by pure coincidence, their paths crossed at a supply yard in Dawson City. Tony was picking up spare parts, Parker was buying fuel. The two men met near the loading dock. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with history. Teacher and student, rivals and survivors. Parker broke the silence. "Heard you're back in business," he said with a half smile. Tony grinned. "You hear right. Don't get too comfortable, kid." Parker laughed lightly. "Wouldn't dream of it." For a brief second, there was mutual respect. Two miners who understood each other better than anyone else. Then, as quickly as it came, the moment was gone. They turned and walked away, both knowing the Yukon wasn't big enough for the two of them to stay quiet forever. Back at his camp, Tony pushed his crew harder than ever. "We're not just mining gold," he told them. "We are mining pride." His voice echoed through the valley, and his men cheered. The ground responded with promise. Gold dust began to appear thicker in every cleanup. The dream was alive again. But success often brings new storms. One night, a violent rain hit the camp. The rivers overflowed, the pumps jammed, and the water flooded into the dig site. Hours of work vanished under the rushing current. His crew scrambled to save the machinery, but it was too late. The pit collapsed, swallowing half of their progress. Tony stood in the rain, soaked and furious. His daughter ran to him. "Dad, we have to stop." But he just stared at the flood. "No," he whispered, "we rebuild." And rebuild they did. The next morning, under gray skies, the crew began again. Mud clung to their boots, but their spirits refused to die. "We've lost ground before," Tony reminded them, "and we always take it back." Meanwhile, Parker's crew faced their own storm, not from nature, but from within. Overwork, exhaustion, and constant pressure led to mistakes. Machinery broke down, workers argued, and production slowed. Parker's foreman warned him, "We're pushing too hard." But Parker couldn't stop. The success had become an obsession. He wanted to stay on top, not just for the money, but to prove something to himself and to Tony. As weeks passed, both men fought their battles, one against the system, the other against his own ambition. And in the distance, the Yukon kept its secrets, silent
and indifferent to their struggles. Then, as if fate wanted to remind them who really ruled the land, the weather changed again. The temperature dropped suddenly. Snow began to fall early, a sign that the season was ending sooner than expected. For miners, early snow means one thing: panic. The ground would soon freeze solid, making mining impossible. Tony pushed his crew to run day and night. "Every bucket counts," he shouted. "This might be our last run before winter." His men worked through exhaustion, driven by his unbreakable will. Parker did the same. He doubled shifts, fixed machines overnight, and refused to stop. The Yukon became a battlefield of noise, light, and determination. Tony on one side, Parker on the other. 2 generations, 2 warriors, both racing against time and nature. When the final cleanup came, both men stood before their wash plants, silent and anxious. Tony's gold poured slowly, glowing under the lamps. It wasn't his biggest haul, but it was honest, a comeback he had fought tooth and nail for. Parker's gold, on the other hand, overflowed his pants. He had broken his own record again. But while Parker's numbers were higher, Tony's victory was deeper. Against all odds, he had survived the ban, the floods, and the pressure. He looked at his gold and smiled faintly. "They tried to stop me," he said softly, "but the Viking doesn't sink." Beets! The Yukon was buzzing again, not from engines this time, but from voices demanding justice. When Tony heard what Parker had said, he sat quietly for a while. His wife looked at him and asked, "What are you thinking?" Tony smiled a little. "I didn't think the kid had it in him," he said. "Took guts to do that." Weeks later, the ruling finally came. The mining office lifted Tony's ban, but added stricter monitoring. It wasn't total victory, but it was enough. Tony was back, officially. His crew celebrated, laughing and cheering around the bonfire. Tony just stood there, staring into the flames. "We're not done yet," he said softly. "Now we show them what real mining looks like." By spring, Tony's machines roared back to life. The sound of engines filled the valley once more. The frost melted, revealing the golden dirt beneath. The Viking was back on his throne, not as a king ruling others, but as a fighter who refused to stay down. Across the river, Parker restarted his own camp too, but something had changed in him. He wasn't chasing Tony anymore. He wasn't chasing fame or records. He was chasing respect for the land, for the work, and for the people who lived it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, he watched Tony's dredge rumble to life again. "He earned this," Parker said quietly, "every inch of it." The two men didn't meet again that season, but their rivalry turned into something deeper, mutual respect. The Yukon had room for both of them, and both knew that without the other, the gold wouldn't shine as bright. As summer turned to fall, both camps finished their final cleanups. Parker's total was massive, one of his best ever. Tony's was smaller, but pure. He held a nugget in his hand, turned it in the light, and smiled. "Doesn't matter how much you pull," he said. "What matters is that you dig it honest." The season ended quietly. The cameras packed up, the engines cooled, and the snow returned. But the story of Tony Beets and Parker Schnabel would live on. Two miners from different generations, locked in a battle that wasn't really about gold, but about heart. Some people called it rivalry, others called it destiny. But in the Yukon, legends aren't written in ink. They're carved in ice, forged in mud, and washed in gold. And this one, the story of the man who was banned, betrayed, and rebuilt himself from the ground up, would be told for years to come. Tony stood one last time at the edge of his claim. The wind howled across the valley, carrying the sound of distant machinery. He took a deep breath and smiled. Still standing, still mining. The camera pulled back, showing the vast white wilderness stretching endlessly around him. One man, one dream, one legacy. The Viking of the Klondike, unbroken and undefeated. Parker's smile grew wider each week as he watched the scales tip in his favor. "This is what happens when you stay focused," he told his team. "We don't waste time blaming anyone, we just dig." For Tony, every ounce of gold Parker found felt like a personal insult, a reminder of what he was missing. But deep down, even Parker knew that without Tony Beets, he might never have become the miner he was. There was respect, but also rivalry, the kind that fuels legends. Weeks passed. The Yukon thawed, rivers flowed again, and the mining season reached its peak. Tony's legal team finally received a notice. The government had agreed to review his case. It wasn't victory, but it was hope. Tony smiled for the first time in months. "They'll regret ever crossing me," he said. Meanwhile, Parker reached his biggest gold total yet. His team celebrated, cheering and shouting as gold poured into the pans. But as he looked around, Parker couldn't help thinking of Tony. "He's not done," he said quietly. "He'll be back." And deep in the Yukon night, as the campfires flickered and the mountains slept, Tony Beets stood by his idle dredge, the wind whipping through his hair. His eyes gleamed with determination. "They banned me, but they can't stop me. I'll be back, and I'll take back what's mine."